This episode includes discussions of child abuse, neglect, and the disappearance of a young child. Some details are disturbing and may be difficult to hear. Please use care in listening, especially around children or if these topics are personally triggering. Listener discretion is strongly advised. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And this is Crime Salad. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information leading to answers in the disappearance of a little girl from Washington State. The Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office considers her missing and presumed deceased. Her name is Oakley Lynn Carlson. Oakley's case is heartbreaking, and not only because of the tragedy surrounding her disappearance, but because it shines a light on how our child welfare system can fail children. Oakley was last seen alive in February of 2021 when she was just 4 years old. And despite thriving in foster care, she was returned to her biological parents under Washington's reunification policies. And within a matter of months, she vanished. Reunification with biological parents is often treated as the ultimate goal of foster care, even when there are warning signs. And for Oakley, that meant leaving a safe, stable foster home and going back to an environment that was unstable, unsafe, and ultimately, allegedly, led to her disappearance. Today, we're going to walk through what happened in Oakley's case, the red flags that were overlooked, and why so many child advocates believe the system's focus on reunification over safety and consistency has devastating consequences for children like her. On December 6, 2016, Oakley Lynn Carlson entered the world. Growing up, Oakley was the kind of child who radiated joy. She smiled easily, she was kind, and she had a natural way of making people laugh. And if she figured out how to bring a smile to your face, she would remember and do it over and over again. She even had a favorite punchline. After telling a joke, she would grin and shout, "Waka waka," like Fozzie Bear from the Muppets. Even at a young age, Oakley was remarkably bright. By the time that she was just shy of 3, she was speaking in full sentences, asking thoughtful questions, and showing a deep sense of empathy. One moment that really stood out to her foster mother was when she watched Wall-E for the first time. As soon as she realized Wall-E was lonely, she teared up and asked why he didn't have any friends. And when Eve arrived, Oakley lit up with joy, relieved he wasn't alone anymore.
And it's crazy how in tune she was to others at such a young age. I mean, even fictional characters. Oakley already was showing such emotional depth, and she's not even 3 years old.
Right. It's so inspiring for who she could have become. And she had more talents, too. She loved to dance. Her foster family turned their living room into a dance floor just for her, and Oakley would copy moves she saw from her mom's dance team. She had favorite songs on repeat, especially Barbara Ann by the Beach Boys, and her foster mother said that they must have played that song hundreds, if not thousands of times, just to see her smile. And Oakley also loved books. Bedtime was never just one story. It was 4 or 5, sometimes more. And it wasn't unusual to find her asleep surrounded by picture books or waking up with them piled around her bed. Her favorite books included Brown Bear, What Do You See?, I Loved You Since Forever, Night Night Little Pookie, and I Love You Blankie. But maybe more than anything else, Oakley loved people. She was affectionate, always ready with a hug or a snuggle, and she had a sweet habit of keeping just a little bit of contact, even if it was her tiny foot resting against your side while she sat nearby. She wanted the people she loved to feel it.
And that's the thing. Child development experts will tell you that those first years shape everything. When a child has stability, a routine, caregivers who love them, and a safe place to grow, it gives them a kind of protection. And the thing is, Oakley had that when she was with the Hiles family.
Yeah, which leads us to how she ended up with the Hiles family. So by the time Oakley was 7 months old, in October of 2017, she was placed into foster care. Oakley would spend nearly the first 3 years of her life with her foster parents, Jamie Jo and Eric Hiles. And during that time, she thrived in a stable, loving environment, something she hadn't had at her biological home, which was an environment that was unstable and dangerous. Her biological father, Andrew Carlson, had once been a peace officer. He completed the basic law enforcement academy in 2012, and he worked as an officer for a short time. But in early 2017, he was caught making false and misleading statements, which cost him his certification. And about a year and a half later, Andrew was charged with malicious mischief in the third degree, which usually means intentionally damaging someone else's property.
So, a history of trouble with law enforcement for Oakley's father, but also Oakley's mother. Jordan Bowers had been in trouble for all kinds of things: disorderly conduct, drunk driving, hit and runs, fraud, and theft. But most concerning was the fact that she was charged with possession and consumption of controlled substances as far back as 2008. And that pattern repeated as both Jordan and Andrew were known to expose their children to drug use throughout the years, because Oakley was just one of multiple children they had together.
Yeah, I believe from what's online that Oakley was the youngest of two siblings who come up very briefly in her case. Their names or identifiable information isn't publicly available because obviously they're children and they deserve protection. But we will have it come up a few times throughout this discussion of this episode. And I want to mention these children were also wildly failed by their parents in the system. While Oakley was thriving in foster care, her biological parents continued down unstable and dangerous paths. It's not very clear if the other siblings were with them during this time, but it sure seems like they were from what's online. As far as Jamie Jo and Eric, the foster parents in Oakley's life, they had been together since high school sweethearts who talked about wanting a big family one day, even joking that they hoped for a basketball team's worth of kids. After years of infertility struggles, failed treatments, and several miscarriages, that dream felt out of reach. They stepped back to heal and to figure out what their future might look like. So, in July of 2017, Jamie Jo, working as a teacher, got an unexpected text from a former student. That student knew one of Oakley's grandparents and asked if she and Eric might be willing to foster a 7-month-old baby girl. For Jamie Jo and Eric, it felt like the opportunity they had been waiting for. They were even told that fostering this child might eventually lead to adoption. 2 months later, Oakley came home to them. And from that moment, she was part of their family.
And in Oakley's eyes, Jamie and Eric, they were her parents. She called them mom and dad. She only knew Jordan and Andrew by their first names during supervised visits arranged by the state.
Right. So for more than 2 years, Oakley's world was the Hiles household. She had consistency, stability, and a family who adored her. It was the perfect environment for a little girl to grow up safe, happy, and loved. And it didn't seem like Oakley's parents were doing much to get her back. And so by the summer of 2018, the state was leaning towards making Oakley's placement with Jamie Jo and Eric permanent. Then, in July that year, her case plan was officially changed to adoption. Things were underway for the Hiles family, and it felt like the beginning of the future they had dreamed about. And while Oakley was thriving, things were very different for her biological parents. This same month, July 30th of 2018, Andrew Carlson was booked on a charge of assault after attacking Jordan Bowers. A few months later, in November of 2018, the court ordered Andrew to undergo a domestic violence evaluation within 90 days of his release and to complete whatever treatment program was recommended.
Although the adoption was in process, Oakley still had supervised visits with her biological parents. Jamie Jo and Eric were supposed to trust those visits were taking place in a controlled setting, with a caseworker or a trained supervisor present. Their job is to watch how the parents interact, step in if anything unsafe is happening, and report back to the court. However, that didn't really seem like that was happening.
Right, because on March 7th of 2019, Oakley returned from a 2-hour supervised visit with her diaper unchanged. She also had red marks and scratches on her cheeks. And when Jamie Jo asked the visit supervisor, Brenda, what happened, Brenda said she didn't know where the marks came from. Supervisors are expected to observe closely and document anything unusual, especially injuries or hygiene concerns. If a toddler comes back with visible facial scratches and an unchanged diaper after 2 hours, it should be noted and explained. And if it can't be explained, that's a reportable red flag that should trigger a follow-up. So on March 26th, Jamie Jo emailed Washington DCYF caseworker Angela Fries, attaching a visit observation log discussing the March 7th incident, which included a photo of the scratches on Oakley's face. According to Jamie Jo, these things were not addressed by the supervisor, Brenda. In response, Angela Fries said that she was on vacation and that a health and safety evaluation could be scheduled when she returned, though it would be difficult to find a day due to Oakley's frequent visitations.
So if we're getting this right, a foster parent raised a specific safety concern tied to a documented visit, and the immediate response was delay. Not a same-day check, not a pause or modification of visits, just a we'll look into it when the calendar allows. In a case involving a toddler, that's a big mistake. These are the moments where the system is supposed to be on the side of the child, even if that just means tightening up visit conditions temporarily.
Right, and this wouldn't be the last time Jamie Jo raised concerns and saw limited action. For Oakley, these signs should have been treated as risk indicators in her plan. By May of 2018, the warning signs surrounding Oakley's parents were getting harder to ignore. On May 13th, the domestic violence treatment program Andrew Carlson was required to complete sent a letter to Washington's Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services. And the letter stated Andrew had failed to comply with the program. He stopped attending group sessions on April 1st and was discharged from treatment. To be reinstated, he had to pay a $115 reinstatement fee.
This was a court-ordered program after the domestic violence arrest the year before. So failing to show up was a direct violation of the conditions of his release.
Right, which I think this shows his commitment towards getting Oakley back. At this point, it had been almost 2 years, and Andrew had shown he wasn't interested in taking the necessary steps to have Oakley back in his life. Under federal law, the child welfare system is built around the Adoption and Safe Families Act. Generally, states give biological parents about 12 to 15 months to correct the issues that caused removal. Things like substance abuse treatment, counseling, stable housing, or parenting classes. And if a parent makes progress, the plan usually stays on track for reunification. But if they fail to comply, have subsequent arrest, or show no improvement, the state can change the child's plan to adoption, like what we're seeing here. So when Oakley's plan was switched in 2018, it meant that the state decided her parents weren't meeting the requirements and that it was in her best interest to stay permanently with her foster family. And at this point, it had been almost 2 years, and it doesn't seem like the parents were doing anything to really combat this plan. At least looking from the outside in, that's what it looks like.
And if we're being honest, it seems like this plan was in everybody's best interest. Oakley would have a stable, loving home with the people she already called mom and dad. Andrew and Jordan could continue doing whatever they do, whatever they want to do. And Jamie Jo and Eric could have what they hoped for so long, a child of their own.
Right. And that's where it seemed like it was heading when on May 16th of 2019, Child Protective Services, a separate entity from Washington, DCYF, filed a detailed report on both Jordan, Bowers, and Andrew Carlson. The contents were sealed and confidential, but it meant that the state likely compiled serious concerns about Oakley's biological parents to present in court. Then on May 20th of 2019, the prosecuting attorney in Andrew's 2018 assault case filed a petition to revoke his earlier stipulation of domestic violence treatment. In plain terms, they told the court Andrew failed to prove he completed a domestic violence evaluation or followed recommended treatment, and the state asked the judge to recognize the violation and review the police reports, essentially asking to move forward and find Andrew guilty, sending him to jail for the assault.
And you would think that all of this would tip the scale even further towards adoption for Oakley. We have a child thriving in foster care and a long document of ongoing issues with her biological parents.
And for the next 3 months, Andrew was in and out of court for additional hearings relating to his domestic violence case and his failure to comply with treatment. But despite all of this, Oakley's case began shifting. On September 30th of 2019, Jamie Jo and Eric were contacted by Washington DCYF and told that Oakley would be returned to her biological parents' care in January of 2020. So even with the history of substance abuse, violence, and documented concerns during supervised visits, the system was preparing to send Oakley back to the same environment. that based on the evidence that we're seeing didn't seem to have changed much. I mean, maybe there were things behind the scenes that we're not aware of, but looking from the outside in doesn't look good. On October 11th of 2019, Jamie, Joe, and Eric met with caseworkers Angela Fries and Catherine Eddy at the Aberdeen DCYF office, and they were deeply concerned about how quickly Oakley was being pushed back into Andrew and Jordan's custody. During this meeting, they asked about the fact that neither Jordan nor Andrew were employed. Their response was, "She isn't your daughter, and being poor isn't a reason for someone not to have their children."
So that's true on paper. Poverty alone isn't supposed to be the reason that you terminate parental rights. But from my understanding, the foster parents weren't raising poverty as the only issue. Their concerns were more about in the context of everything else: criminal charges, failed treatment programs, domestic violence, and the fact that neither of them seemed to have a way to provide for Oakley. Stable employment is usually a big part of reunification requirements, so it's not unreasonable to bring up.
And as we'll see later, these concerns weren't unreasonable. A week later, on October 19th, 2019, Oakley had her first unsupervised visit with Jordan and Andrew. On October 26th, after another unsupervised visit, Oakley told Jamie Joe she witnessed violence between Andrew and Jordan. She said Jordan hit Andrew during an argument about a video Oakley was watching on one of their phones, and Jamie Joe immediately emailed Andrew Fries to report what Oakley had said. In response, Angela said there were no concerns and that Oakley loves her mom and dad. So even when Oakley herself gave information pointing to violence in the home, just days after unsupervised visit time, it was brushed aside as if it wasn't credible.
And children are so observant. They watch everything. The website Justice for Oakley, which is where we got a lot of this timeline, has a video of Oakley telling her foster father what was happening in her home. And it's chilling now that we're here talking about her. It makes you wonder what these social workers were thinking to dismiss foster parents who wanted only what was best for Oakley.
But regardless, the unsupervised visits continued, and they were set to move into overnights. On November 6th of 2019, Jamie Joe emailed Angela Fries and Catherine Eddy again. She learned that overnight visits with Jordan and Andrew were about to begin and reminded them that Oakley had recently reported witnessing domestic violence. She said she was worried things were moving too fast. And the response she got wasn't surprising at this point. Angela told Jamie Joe that Oakley would not only be reunified with her biological parents, but that instead of January of 2020, Oakley would now be going home on November 29th, just a couple weeks away.
Yeah, I'm really struggling to understand why the case was handled this way. Not to mention, Andrew still has an active assault case, and then we're just moving up the timeline? It really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew's legal troubles were probably the biggest barrier to reunification. So what happened was, on November 13th, just 4 days after Oakley's first overnight, the judge in Andrew's case suddenly reversed the motion and dismissed the assault charges. So on paper, at least legally, there was nothing left to stop the state from sending Oakley back home. On November 17th, Eric emailed Angela and Catherine asking for answers about Oakley's transition and why the timeline was moved up by 2 months. His concerns were met with silence. No one responded. Oakley was returned to the care of Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson on November 29th, despite pushback from the Hiles family. Oakley had lived with the Hiles for more than 2 years, essentially her entire life. They were the people that she called mom and dad. They gave her stability, routine, and love. Overnight, she was placed back into a home with parents she only knew by their first name through limited visits. For Oakley, this was like a sudden, disorienting transition from everything familiar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these people were essentially strangers to her. But in child welfare, courts and agencies, they overwhelmingly favor reunification when they believe it's safe, which they should. I mean, children have a right to grow up with their biological family when possible, and parents have a fundamental liberty interest in raising their children. So I'm not against reunification as a default goal. But court-level stakeholders say reunification decisions, they're shaped by the child's bond with the biological parent, the parent's progress, and the belief that permanency shouldn't be severed unless necessary.
And these are the exact points many people later raised when advocating for Oakley. But for now, Oakley was considered fully back in Jordan and Andrew's care. On June 3rd of 2020, Oakley's dependency matter with the state was officially closed. Social worker Angela Fries signed the paperwork, and with that, Oakley was no longer under state supervision. A month later, during an unrelated custody hearing, possibly with one of Oakley's siblings, court filings referenced a detailed CPS report from May of 2019 about Jordan and Andrew, the same one that was sealed previously while Oakley was with the Hiles. The first issue in the document was substance abuse. Jordan had been ordered to undergo urinalysis testing. One result was ineligible, and the report included a comment Jordan made to her social worker that she knew how to pass a UA. There were also domestic violence assessments. Jordan completed 2 separate evaluations. One recommended 1 year of treatment, and the second concluded no services were necessary. However, the report also noted that Jordan wasn't honest in reporting her history of violence during that second evaluation. The court documents also noted concerns about their ability to meet the needs of one of their disabled children, one of Oakley's siblings. Specifically, they failed to show up for a scheduled hospital appointment, even though they were provided a gas card to cover the travel expenses.
It makes you wonder what caused the court to close this case then. After all of this documentation and the apparent red flags, it seems that Jordan and Andrew weren't capable of giving Oakley a quality of life at this time.
Or really any of their kids.
And it's really like they didn't take any red flags or what should be concerns seriously at all.
Right, and it's not like if Jordan and Andrew's rights were terminated, Oakley wouldn't have anywhere to go.
Exactly.
I mean, we've heard of cases where children are reunified to avoid adding more caseloads, and I get that social workers are overworked. But in this case, Oakley had a loving family ready to adopt her and give her the life she deserved. For some strange reason, that didn't happen. By December of 2020, Jordan and Andrew had Oakley back in their home for just over a year. Oakley spent Christmas with her grandparents, Fred and Kate Carlson. And during the investigation that followed, Oakley's grandmother told police Oakley didn't look well during this visit. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, and scratches and sores on her face.
Okay, so another red flag coming from someone who is within this biological family.
Right. A month later, on January 26th, Jamie Jo once again raised alarms. She had seen a photo of Oakley from that Christmas gathering, which appeared to show what looked like a black eye. Jamie Jo also heard rumors that Andrew had been fired from his job for drug use. Concerned, she reached out to the local police chief for advice.
And that chief gave her some good advice. Alma Police Chief Susan Schultz explained that Oakley's home in Oakville wasn't in her jurisdiction, so she couldn't do a welfare check herself. But she told Jamie Jo that if she called DCYF, a sheriff could be sent to check on her.
And that's what Jamie Jo did. She called Washington State DCYF and spoke with intake worker Morgan Artis. Morgan told her that because she hadn't personally witnessed the alleged abuse, her information wasn't accurate, and warned that she could get in trouble for making false reports. So once again, Jamie Jo, who was a mandated reporter by profession, who knew the signs of neglect and abuse, and who had experience caring for Oakley, was ignored by DCYF. However, the next day, a case was opened, and a social worker was assigned to check on Oakley and her siblings. In fact, there were 8 separate reports investigated around this time. Jordan and Andrew refused to cooperate with the investigation. Instead of treating that refusal as a red flag, Oakley was left in their care. The investigation continued for the next couple of months, and in March of 2021, Jamie Jo received a call from Washington DCYF asking if she had seen Oakley or her sister recently. In this bizarre ask, Jamie Jo told them that she hadn't, and that Oakley was no longer in her care. Despite her questions, she wasn't told why she was being asked, and by the end of March, DCYF closed the case, without a social worker ever laying eyes on Oakley again.
Okay, so I really want to point this part out. So they're looking for Oakley. Basically, they're asking in a way that hinted that they didn't know where Oakley was. But then all of a sudden, the case is closed without ever checking on the child. And This feels highly neglectful to just wrap up the case because she wasn't found. It's almost like they're like, oh, it wasn't my problem.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you do a home visit and physically lay eyes on the child to shut this down. I mean, without that step, without confirming Oakley's well-being, is appalling. And there was cause for concern. Like we said, there were 8 separate reports investigated around this time. Regardless if 100 red flags were up in the air for Oakley, she was still known to be left in their care. And we've said it before, but state programs like this, they're overloaded. Caseworkers are carrying staggering caseloads, managing dozens of children at once. It's a heavy burden, and in many ways, the system sets them up to fail. But here's the thing, this isn't just paperwork or numbers, it's a child's life. And while everyone hopes for the best outcome with a biological family, at what point do we step in and fill in these gaps? Because when this pattern keeps repeating, children are the ones who pay the price. In November of 2021, about 9 months after Oakley's case had been closed, Andrew Carlson called dispatch just before 5 p.m. to report a fire at their home that he said started around 10 a.m., and he claimed that Oakley lit the couch on fire with a lighter. He said that he put it out and there was no response needed. Later, court documents and statements indicated conflicting explanations, including that Jordan said they fought the fire for hours. And the investigators concluded that the fire most likely began in the microwave, not the couch.
It's just a really strange scenario, and it makes you wonder why he would even call unless he didn't want anyone to come to the house. Not to mention, there's kids in the house. Even if a couch had been set on fire by a 4-year-old, that would be terrifying. Is the little girl okay? Does she need medical attention? I mean, it doesn't seem like there was any type of obvious concern for the children. The whole thing just feels off. Maybe it was a complete accident, but your mind starts to wonder 100 different questions. Was this for money? Was this for an insurance claim? I mean, what were they hiding?
It is very strange. And it's also interesting how 4 days after the fire report, Oakville Elementary School principal Jessica Swift actually went to the Carlson home with supplies for the family and stayed for about 45 minutes. When she asked about Oakley, Jordan and Andrew told her that Oakley was in her room. What's also interesting, a week later, a GoFundMe was created by Anna Johnson to benefit Jordan after the fire. The next day, Jamie Jo emailed Angela Fries and Catherine Eddy, the original social workers, to flag the fire and what she called the suspicious GoFundMe. In that email, she added detail about Oakley's return to her biological parents, saying it was abrupt following the birth of her little brother. So now, Oakley has 3 siblings. Jamie Jo explained that Oakley's grandparents enable their children and won't report the abuse happening in the home, hoping someone else will. And she also detailed that the fire occurred in the upstairs area of the house and that the parents couldn't find their phones to call 911, but instead fought the fire for hours. This was all according to the GoFundMe page. She also claimed that they didn't report the fire the same day, but 2 weeks later. She called this odd and dangerous behavior that could have cost the children their lives. Here's a part of Jamie Jo's email in her own words. I am writing you to document that if something is to happen to those children, and I have tried multiple times to help them, that CPS and DCYF are at fault and will not only be in huge legal trouble, but the public relations fallout of protecting those children will be massive. Protecting was in all caps and bolded. Jamie Jo said that she would be calling CPS that afternoon to demand the fire be investigated, and attached the GoFundMe page and screenshots of a conversation with Andrew's mother, where she stated abuse happened in the home during March of 2021. She closed by saying, "Please do your due diligence and inspect this, regardless if I am getting a response back or not. Those children deserve it." And unsurprisingly, Jamie Jo didn't get a response, but she kept her promise and called to report her concerns. Nothing was done. A few days later, Principal Swift returned with more supplies. This time she stayed for about 5 minutes and saw Oakley's 3 siblings, but not Oakley.
And it's not like Jamie Jo was the only person raising concerns through this mysterious fire. That month, 3 separate reports were made to Washington DCYF flagging the fire, the failure to report it, and the fact that the family was still living in the damaged structure, even after the insurance agent warned that it was unsafe. all 3 calls were screened out and ignored. I mean, how many calls or emails does DCYF need to care?
It's unbelievable. And it makes you wonder, why are they even there if they're going to dismiss reports over and over? What kept them from doing anything? I don't know. Luckily, more people were getting concerned, including Principal Swift. On December 4th of 2021, Oakley's 6-year-old sibling went to Jessica's home for a play date and sleepover, and during their time together, Swift asked about Oakley. The sibling became upset and said, "Oakley is no more." When Swift asked again, the sibling said Oakley had gone to live with her former foster parents, Jamie Jo and Eric.
I don't know. That just screams coaching to me. Or at least the scary fact that despite both answers, Oakley wasn't with her biological parents. So maybe Jordan and Andrew told the sibling that Oakley was back with Jamie Jo and Eric. I mean, that'd be my guess.
Well, the next day, Jessica asked the sibling again if Oakley was living with them, and they answered no, saying Oakley was with the Hiles. Because of this, Jessica contacted the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office, expressed concerns for Oakley, and requested a welfare check. The next morning at 10 a.m., officers with the Tumwater Police Department conducted a welfare check, finding Jordan and Andrew in a hotel room, and they questioned them about Oakley's welfare. I couldn't find the details of that interaction, but it seems Andrew and Jordan were able to explain away Oakley's absence.
Looking at court documents now, 2 hours later, Jordan factory reset her phone, wiping all information, almost immediately after she spoke to police about Oakley.
And if that's not suspicious enough, I don't know what is. Unfortunately, police didn't know this at the time. By 3:30 p.m., officers confirmed that Bowers and Carlson had left the hotel with their 2-year-old child and returned home.
And then around the same time, Andrew Carlson called the Thurston County non-emergency line to finally report Oakley missing. He claimed they'd lost track of her, and they also reported the last sighting as November 30th, 2021. But here's the kicker. The date of this call was December 6th. That's almost a full week later.
What really sticks out to me is Andrew's calling the non-emergency line for his daughter that he hasn't seen since November 30th.
Yeah, a full week later, and it's a non-emergency.
And if you remember, this is the same month that the fire happened in the house.
Mm-hmm.
This is also the same time frame where the principal showed up at the house to give them things and was looking for Oakley, and she was in her room. And then there was another instance where, she spoke to the siblings and they said she's no more. And according to court documents, Andrew had already been making comments suggesting that Oakley might be dead. He was saying things like she wasn't coming back.
Which, let's be honest, parents of a missing child, they don't normally talk like that. I mean, not within hours of police getting involved. And remember, he didn't even report her missing until the officers had already questioned them. And that makes this whole thing so much more suspicious. It almost feels calculated.
Exactly. And that suspicion led to immediate arrest. Jordan Bowers was booked into the Grays Harbor County Jail on charges of obstructing an officer and suspicion of first-degree manslaughter. By 9:30 that night, Andrew Carlson was booked too, also on suspicion of first-degree manslaughter. But that manslaughter arrest was only a 72-hour investigative hold. And when that hold expired on December 9th of 2021, prosecutors hadn't filed formal homicide charges. This is because prosecutors didn't have enough physical evidence to prove a homicide beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that obstruction charge? Well, my guess is that it came from the very first interview with police. We know now from their history that Jordan and Andrew weren't exactly cooperating with investigators, which law enforcement did later confirm. And honestly, the other kids in the family, that confuses me too, because they were at a hotel with only their 2-year-old. So where was Oakley? Where was the rest of her siblings?
Right. And that's a good question, because during this time, Oakley's older siblings, the ones old enough to speak, were interviewed. Her 6-year-old sister was questioned by a forensic interviewer at the Children's Advocacy Center in Montesano. And Oakley's older brother spoke with detectives, and what they shared painted a devastating picture.
Yeah, and Oakley's sister told child advocate Nina Taylor that her mother, Jordan Bowers, had warned her not to talk about Oakley. And when the interviewer pressed, the little girl repeated exactly what her mom had said, that Oakley had gone out into the woods and she had been eaten by wolves.
Which is devastating hearing that from a little girl about her own sister. And then Oakley's 9-year-old brother described seeing even more. He said Oakley was sometimes locked in a closet, maybe under a stairwell. He talked about Jordan beating her with a belt, and he admitted he worried Oakley was starving.
And remember, there's also now a baby in the picture. These kids weren't inventing stories. Kids that age reflect on what they see, what they're told, and what they live through. For them to be describing closets, starvation, wolves, it's enraging. And here's the heartbreaking detail. All of this came out on December 6, 2021. That was Oakley's 5th birthday.
Yes, and that day ended with Jamie Jo getting a phone call she never expected. Officials asked her if she'd seen Oakley, and if she'd be willing to take Oakley's baby brother, and Oakley herself if she was found, into emergency foster placement. From Jamie Jo's perspective, this had to be unbearable. For years, she'd been the one raising alarms. She reported those scratches, the bruises, the stories about violence. She called about the fire, about the suspicious fundraiser, about Oakley not being seen, and every time she was told that there were no concerns. And now, with Oakley gone, she was the one being called to step back in.
I mean, this just blows my mind. This is the same system that ignored her, threatened her, dismissed her. Now they're calling her for damage control. Of course, these kids needed safety, but for Jamie Jo, this must have felt like a gut punch after everything she did to prevent this.
Exactly. And at least at this point, Oakley's siblings were finally being looked at more closely, even though Jamie Jo had been begging for years for the whole family to be investigated. So yes, it did happen, but only after tragedy. On December 7th of 2021, investigators continued searching the Carlson property. That same day, the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office posted on Facebook asking the public for help in finding Oakley. Meanwhile, Oakley's sister and older brother were placed in temporary foster care. And when her new foster parents asked law enforcement about her prescribed medication, investigators discovered something shocking. Jordan and Andrew hadn't been giving her that medication for the past 15 months.
15 months. That's not missing a dose here and there. That's straight up neglect. And that medication wasn't optional. Without it, she was at risk of permanent physical damage. I mean, even death.
And while that was happening, the search for Oakley ramped up. Detectives with the sheriff's office, troopers from the Washington State Patrol, and FBI agents were all combing through the family's 300-acre property, digging in multiple spots, which tells you something. They weren't searching with hope of finding Oakley alive. They were searching for her body.
And then just a couple days later, on December 9th, new charges came down against Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. Abandonment of a dependent person in the 2nd degree. These charges were tied directly to the neglect of Oakley's sister and the medication she desperately needed.
Right, and that neglect was critical. Her sister's health was seriously at risk. The charges were proof that prosecutors were at least trying to hold Jordan and Andrew accountable for something. But for Oakley, there was still no justice.
And this is what's so maddening. Oakley wasn't the only child suffering from neglect in that home, but the system failed to see it until it was too late.
And because Oakley's body hadn't been found, prosecutors dropped the manslaughter charges. Instead, they pivoted to what they could prove, the endangerment and neglect of her siblings. At that point, Washington DCYF finally collected hair follicle samples from the children, and the results showed exactly what you would expect. High levels of methamphetamine. The kids weren't just exposed to drugs, it's possible that they ingested them.
Which is devastating. These kids were living in a house filled with drugs, violence, and neglect, and Oakley was trapped in it too.
And by then, public outrage was exploding. Just like Jamie Jo predicted in that email, petitions demanding stronger protections for kids leaving foster care spread quickly. One reached 7,000 signatures. It called for follow-up checks after reunification and long-term drug testing for parents who regained custody. And lawmakers started to pay attention. Representative Mike Chapman, who represents Oakley's district, said that he met with other legislators and DCYF staff. He promised to look at policy and budget solutions. Meanwhile, demonstrators were showing up outside the courthouse at every hearing Jordan and Andrew attended. People were demanding answers and holding signs that said things like, "Justice for Oakley." And of course, Jordan and Andrew, they pled not guilty to the abandonment charges.
Right, because why would they admit that they were putting their children in danger?
Exactly. But prosecutors, they weren't finished. On October 20th of 2022, they filed a motion to add 2 new counts of child endangerment with a controlled substance based on the meth exposure in Oakley's siblings. Evidence showed that the exposure went back as far as July of 2021.
And what did Jordan and Andrew do? They pled not guilty again, denying any wrongdoing. It's just the same pattern: denial, neglect, and refusal to take accountability.
And in response, Jamie Jo filed a formal complaint with the Office of Family and Children's Ombuds, the independent watchdog for Washington child's welfare system. She was determined to hold DCYF accountable, even after Oakley was gone.
And now advocacy groups like Light the Way were launching campaigns, calling and emailing the governor, the attorney general, and legislators every week. They wanted an outside agency to review DCYF's handling of Oakley's case.
And this pressure worked. So in May of 2022, Governor Jay Inslee sent a letter to Patrick Dowd, the director of the Office of Family and Children's Ombuds. He asked for a review of Oakley's case to make sure DCYF had followed proper protocols and to see whether their actions contributed to her disappearance.
Which sounds like exactly what should have happened. The governor stepping in, asking for accountability.
Right, but when Dowd called Jamie Jo, his response wasn't reassuring. He told her that an outside review probably wasn't possible under current law and even suggested that she take things with a grain of salt.
That's crazy. I mean, if the governor himself is requesting it, you'd think that would be an open door.
You would think so. Dowd later told Jamie Jo that the Ombuds office couldn't release information publicly unless there was a fatality review. And this only happens if a child's death is confirmed. Since Oakley is still considered missing, even though she was presumed dead, the review was stuck in deadlock.
Which meant no answers, no accountability.
Exactly. And yet, Jamie Jo didn't stop. She kept showing up at the oversight board meetings, speaking out month after month. Then, in July of 2022, the Hiles family and Light the Way hosted a fundraiser called Paint the Night Pink. It was an auction dinner in Oakley's honor, and they raised nearly $50,000 for the reward fund. And it got attention. The governor's office acknowledged their advocacy, even sending a letter thanking them for their efforts.
Which makes it even more frustrating, because behind the scenes, the Ombuds office still wasn't moving forward. It's like everyone was saying the right things publicly, but privately, nothing was actually happening.
And this frustration, it grew even more in September of 2022 when the Ombuds office finally did release a report. But instead of exposing the failures, it cleared DCYF of any wrongdoing. According to the report, DCYF's actions were consistent with state law, policy, and court orders. And the only thing the report suggested was that more resources should be dedicated to family time visitation services.
Which blows my mind because every single red flag in Oakley's case came out of those visitations. Supervised visits weren't supervised. Unsupervised visits were allowed despite reports of violence. Overnight visits happened while concerns were ignored. Visitation wasn't the solution, it was the problem.
And although the Hiles family were devastated, they continued to press on. At another oversight board meeting, a state senator even interrupted a DCYF presentation to say, "I still wonder why we are protecting adults and not this child." Meanwhile, Andrew Carlson wasn't complying with any of his court-ordered conditions after release. He missed hearings, failed paperwork, and still got nothing more than a slap on the wrist.
And by January of 2023, there still hadn't been a single new update in Oakley's case. Jordan Bowers was released from prison around that time, and detectives were waiting.
Right. Detectives, they had already built a new case against her for identity theft and fraud. So the moment that she walked out of prison, she was arrested again. And finally, in January of 2023, Oakley's case hit the floor of the Washington State Legislature. The Oakley Carlson Act was introduced, and it focused on maintaining the safety of children who'd been removed from a parent because of abuse, neglect, or abandonment.
And it named Oakley directly, didn't it?
It did. The introduction said, "The tragic disappearance of 6-year-old Oakley Carlson has captured the attention of people from all corners of Washington state, the United States, and the world. The fact that this vibrant little girl vanished after being removed from loving foster parents and returned to troubled birth parents raises serious questions about the effectiveness of our state's child welfare policies and the bureaucracies."
I mean, that's pretty powerful.
Supporters rallied behind this bill. On February 10th of 2023, the 2-year anniversary of the last credible sighting of Oakley, crowds gathered at the state capitol. They wore pink, her favorite color, and they testified in front of lawmakers. Jamie Jo told them, after Oakley was returned to her bios, to what would be a literal hell on earth for her, "I called twice with concerns about abuse. My daughter's life should not be used for an agenda. My daughter is missing, and DCYF played a part in failing to protect her."
That's heartbreaking. And you would think testimony like that would be enough to move this bill forward.
Yeah, sadly it wasn't. The committee never brought it up for a vote, and just like that, the Oakley Carlson Act died in committee.
I don't even know how Jamie Jo can continue forward. I mean, how many times can the system beat her down like this?
Right, and she didn't stop. Even after the bill died, investigators in Grays Harbor County didn't stop either. They continued searching for Oakley in different locations, but no matter how many times they looked, no matter where they looked, not a shred of evidence turned up. It's like she completely vanished. Meanwhile, Jordan Bowers was back in court in July. This time she pleaded guilty to identity theft, and the judge gave her 43 months in prison, calling her someone who preyed on vulnerable victims and refused to take responsibility.
And while that didn't move Oakley's case forward, at least it put Jordan away again.
Right. So around that same time, investigators filed an emergency motion to access sealed court records tied to Oakley and her siblings. The court granted it, and for the first time, key details became public. Details about the years of abuse Oakley and her siblings endured, and DCYF's long history with the family.
Jeez, finally.
Those records showed that DCYF had been involved with the family since 2013, 8 years before Oakley disappeared. And in that time, they received 11 separate reports. 8 of them were serious enough to investigate. The allegations included domestic violence, physical abuse, drug use, and medical neglect. These documents revealed that Oakley's brother was born with a rare genetic disorder that left him legally blind and dependent on daily medication. As far back as 2017, there were reports that he wasn't getting the care he needed and that Andrew Carlson was using meth.
Which means that this wasn't new, this wasn't sudden. I mean, these kids have been at risk for years.
Exactly. And the most chilling part, in sworn statements, Oakley's siblings described what happened to her. They said Oakley was locked in a cell under the stairs, beaten with a torch or belt, and even hidden under her mother's bed. One child said flat out, "There's no Oakley." Another said that during the house fire in November of 2021, everyone got out except Oakley.
So by the time she vanished, multiple children were giving consistent accounts of abuse, confinement, and neglect. And still the referrals coming in just weeks before her disappearance were screened out. And that's the part that enrages me most. If action had been taken, maybe Oakley, or at least her body, would have been found years ago.
And because of that, Oakley became the symbol of a larger systematic failure. She could have had an amazing life. Instead, her story was shaped by inaction and repeated failures. By the 3-year anniversary of her disappearance, the case was still open, but with no new updates. Both Jordan and Andrew remained suspects, but neither of them were cooperating with investigators. To mark that date, Jamie Jo and Eric placed an ad in the Olympian newspaper directed at Ross Hunter, the secretary of DCYF, and it read, 11 calls to DCYF about abuse and neglect, 1 missing child. Ross Hunter and Washington DCYF, how many cases like Oakley's are you going to let happen?
It's pretty powerful.
A month later, supporters gathered in Olympia for a Pinkathon, a 5K that was held in Oakley's honor. Everyone wore pink, her favorite color, as a way to raise awareness. The event raised more than $7,500 for the reward fund, which pushed it to the $100,000 mark it sits at today. And since then, Jamie Jo has never stopped. She stays active on Facebook, calling herself Oakley's mama, She's hosted book drives, shared interviews with People magazine, spoken out when other children were failed by DCYF, and even cheered when the head of DCYF finally stepped down.
And she also launched a new petition, right?
She did, and it's still active today with a goal of 15,000 signatures. This one directly calls on Governor Bob Ferguson to order a second independent review of DCYF now that more information is public. It even points out that back in 2022, when Ferguson was Attorney General, his office passed the responsibility to the governor's office. But now, as governor, he can't deflect anymore. On September 23rd of 2025, Jordan Bowers was released from prison. It's unclear what the custody situation is with Oakley's siblings. The reports suggest visitation with the parents has been completely denied. And hopefully, that still is the case. Jamie Jo told reporters that she's unsettled that Andrew and Jordan get to live their lives while Oakley remains missing. But she said she hopes Oakley's face haunts them enough that one day they'll come forward with the truth. By now, Oakley would be 8 years old in third grade. For Jamie Jo, keeping her memory alive is the most important thing.
And as of today, the sheriff's office still says that both Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson are still suspects. They just don't have the physical evidence to tie them directly to Oakley's disappearance.
Yeah, investigators, they have floated the possibility of a no-body homicide case, one built without Oakley's remains, but for now, it's still a waiting game. So yeah, investigators say Oakley's case is very much open. According to the Facebook group Where is Oakley Carlson, Jamie Jo shared a screenshot of public court records showing that Pacific County Superior Court opened an estate case for Oakley and lists her as deceased. This was filed on August 12th of 2025 before Judge Donald Richter. Now, this is an estate filing, not a criminal ruling, but it hit the community hard. In her post, Jamie explained that back in May, an attorney for Oakley's biological family asked her to agree to have Oakley declared deceased so her siblings can become heirs to her estate. She refused, saying her focus is on justice in Oakley's criminal case, and that moving forward like this, quietly, without including the people who loved Oakley most, felt deeply wrong to her.
And that's what so many supporters are struggling with too. On paper, it might look like a routine legal filing, a civil court matter, but to those who have been fighting for Oakley, it feels like an injustice, like her life is being decided in back rooms without transparency.
Exactly. And Jamie's frustration is that this wasn't advocacy for Oakley. It didn't feel like love or protection. For her, for thousands of people following this case, it feels like a betrayal of Oakley's memory. Instead of closure, it caused more pain, more questions, and more anger that the justice system still hasn't delivered answers.
I mean, all I can really say is I hope this heartbreak and frustration can be transformed into action, into a renewed push for accountability and justice for Oakley, and for every child that the system has failed. Oakley was just 4 years old when she disappeared, a little girl who deserved to be safe, and her 8th birthday is this year. She was last seen on February of 2021.
And even though she has now been declared deceased for civil matters, the question that matters most still remains. Where is Oakley? As we mentioned, Oakley's biological mother and person of interest in her suspicious disappearance, Jordan Bowers, has recently been released from prison. She was in prison for identity theft and fraud and was released in September of 2025. Oakley's biological parents continue to remain uncooperative with detectives. Jordan, although released, is under continued supervision. But at the recording of this episode, no homicide charges have ever been filed in Oakley's case due to lack of physical evidence. Before we close, I want to share a letter that Jamie Jo wrote directly to Oakley. Dear Oakley Lynn, my noodle girl, when I lay in bed at night, I can't believe that you used to lay in our bed with your feet on my back, and it would bother me. I would do anything to have you put your clammy feet on my back now. I can't thank you enough for all the memories you gave Daddy and I through the good and the bad. When you came to us as a little baby, I didn't even know how to change a diaper or install a car seat. Through you, we learned so many things that I didn't know I would have to learn. You had ear infection after ear infection, and I was so scared for you to be sick. I'll never forget the time you had to get another Rocephin shot. Those are so painful, and you knew as soon as the nurse was laying you down that you were getting another shot in the leg. You looked at me as I held your hand, and the look you gave me said, "Please don't do this again." We both cried, and afterward, a nurse walked in with a popsicle, and I didn't know if it was for you or for me because we both were so upset. I know that I didn't give birth to you, but I wish I did. You were everything I ever dreamed of having in a child. Daddy and I wished and waited so long for a baby, and even though you came to us in an unconventional way, I loved you like you were my own biological child. I loved when strangers would tell us that we had the same smile because it meant that people thought I could have even an ounce of your beauty. I will never forgive myself for not protecting you more when you went back to your biological parents. I thought I was doing everything by calling CPS and making reports to DCYF, but it didn't save you, and for that, I am so sorry. If I could mail this letter to you, I'd want you to know that you're making waves and that so many people are taking action. People in our little town, our state, and around the world know who you are and are thinking of you, praying for you, and doing everything in their power to make sure you're found and that this doesn't happen again. I knew that you'd be influential someday. I just wish it wasn't breaking our hearts in the process. Thank you for loving us, and I promise you that we will do everything we can to bring you justice and protect your siblings. Lovingly, your mama. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. Thank you for supporting Crime Salad, especially from our Patreon members. We truly appreciate it. It keeps the show going. If you like ad-free listening, you can join for just $1 at patreon.com/crimesaladpodcast. And also, don't forget to hit up crimesaladpodcast.com. We just launched a brand new merch drop, and there's a flash sale going on right now. Big thanks to Dashery for making this all possible. We're pumped about this partnership, and trust us, you're not going to want to miss this Crime Salad merch.
Yeah, perfect timing, too. It's fall.
Yeah, there's a lot of Black Cat merch on there.
It's pretty good stuff.
So yeah, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. It's very important to us that Oakley's story gets out there. And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, for caring about Oakley's story as much as we do. We will see you next week.
Crime Salad is a Black Cat production. Check out blackcat.fm for more information.